up. We're going live. Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, and your pharaoh of physical media, Robert Meyer Burnett, and this is a very, very loaded to the brim special edition of Let's Get Physical Media. It wouldn't be a show, however, until I introduce my cohort all the way from Saarbrücken, Deutschland. Your favorite German, my favorite German, Mr. Dieter Bastian. Dieter, how are you, sir?
I'm fine, and I say, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Dieter here I am, rock you like a hurricane, and welcome to the B&B Motel for Let's Get Physical Media. And since we have a guest, I brought out a tie, it's show business, and I will lean a little back today. Normally the people say it's my show, but not this evening, because Rob has gathered a guest for us. So Rob, who do you have for us?
Okay, I was saying earlier, if this was a Martin Scorsese movie or a Steven Soderbergh film and we're in Las Vegas, for instance, or even like a movie like Rafifi, or maybe a Jean-Pierre Melville movie like, I don't know, The Red Circle or something, we would talk about landing a whale and landing landing a guest. I mean, this guy, I'm going to say, Dieter, I'm going to use a bad word, he's a fucking legend. This man has probably, if you were to ask anybody in Hollywood who still remembers anything, anyone in Hollywood, about who knows more about films in terms of studio catalog, the studios nowadays don't even know what they own. They don't know where their prints are. They don't know what what versions exist. We have with us today, I would say, this is not hyperbole, even though I'm prone to that. This is not. This is no bullshit. We have a man who knows more about films and the state of the existence of what versions are where and who owns what than anyone else pretty much alive on the planet Earth today. A home video legend, a man who I can't say enough about, and I don't have to because he's here with us right now. Mr. George Feltenstein. George, my God, I mean, when we started this show, I can't even imagine that I would be able to get someone such as you to be on this fakakta show. But I want to give you a huge welcome to Let's Get Physical Media. And I don't know more to say other than to tell people, like as Wayne and Garth might have said, we're not worthy. So please, welcome to Let's Get Physical Media.
I'm very humbled and very grateful to be here. Very excited.
I mean, I gotta say, I busted out, freshly laundered, by the way. I only wear t-shirts once before they're clean. I did bring out the Laserdisc shirt. And I think for those of you out there who don't know George, if you could give us a brief recap of your entire life. How did you get involved in home entertainment? When did you begin? I mean, I was aware of you in the 80s when I was a Laserdisc retailer. How did you get into home entertainment, and what was your entry into the format?
Well, I was recruited out of college to work in film distribution. And I didn't, as the home video business was developing throughout the, I would say, throughout the 80s, I wasn't a part of it. I was doing 35 millimeter repertory distribution to revival houses in the United States, which was a booming business. And I was the national sales manager of a company. It's no longer in business, unfortunately, called Films Incorporated. Now, this company may sound familiar to a lot of people because they were the 16 millimeter rental company that had movies going out to schools and colleges and churches and whatnot. And they recruited me out of college. As soon as you graduate, we want you to come work here. They had theatrical repertory rights to 100 20th Century Fox films. And their national sales manager had just quit. And I got that job at 21, which was very, very humbling and gratifying. They were not going to give me the job because of my age. And I said, don't hold my age against me. Just let me do my job. And I turned the business from this little microcosm where we had these 100 20th Century Fox movies to having the whole Fox library 6 months and older, the whole Paramount library 6 months and older. We had Warner Brothers cartoons. We had Hal Roach, Laurel and Hardy films. We had all sorts of things. And we did restorations. And then around 1986, I'd say the phone stopped ringing. Basically, home video and pay television had wiped out a majority of the repertory theaters. And as soon as home video came on the scene, I, as a consumer, having owned not the first generation, I didn't have the 1 hour one, but I think at the second Betamax.
Wow.
That I got at Christmas 1977. It was the family Christmas present. And I fought that we'd pick Beta over VHS, and my family never let me live it down.
Yeah, but it was a better format. It was a better format. I
said better quality, but it records less time and it costs more money. I was like, but it's better quality. And something that still is part of my DNA today. Quality is most important. So I saw the home video business develop, and I watched all the things that they were doing wrong. And it just was like, I would love to be a part of this business. And the reason I went to work at Films Incorporated was primarily because they had the MGM library at the time. And that library holds a very special place in my heart. My two favorite studios just happen to be MGM and Warner Brothers. And that's worked out well for me. Let
me ask you, why is that? Why was MGM and Warner Brothers, why are they your favorite studios?
I think overall they made the best films, with obvious exceptions. MGM's films, I think Warner Brothers films, especially Warner Brothers films of the 30s, tend to hold up much better than MGM films of the 30s. But there was something, each studio had a house style, and they were just my particular favorites. And that doesn't mean I don't like a lot of things from other studios, but between the MGM megastar lineup and the incredible directors that they had, and then Warner Brothers doing films that were ripped from the headlines and their pre-codes and gangster films and the films of the 40s, just they were my favorite studios. So,
sorry, I can't search that, but I can search by.
I have to turn off my Siri watch.
Categories like romantic comedies or sci-fi.
That's the first time that's ever happened. So
it's awesome.
I'm taking my watch off.
We have a question that was fired in from 200 Watt Studio and says, Mr. Feltenstein, do you think we'll ever get a Blu-ray of the 1944 Robert Siodmak noir classic Christmas Holiday? And thank you for being here.
I can't answer that question because I don't and never have worked with the Universal Library. That's a Universal-owned film. My assumption as to why it's not available probably has to do with a very bad law that the Supreme Court upheld. It's called the Rear Window decision. Basically, has to do with copyright, and if an author died before the old renewal of copyright term, the studio has to renegotiate with their heirs. And sometimes they either don't want to do it or the price is too high. And when this Supreme Court decision went down in 1989 or 90, I was interviewed by Billboard about it. And I said, hundreds of films will never be seen again. And I had no memory of having done that interview. And when Google Books started to happen, I typed my name in and found a quote from that Billboard article in a law book. And they were quoting me, you know, talking about this case. And it just blew my mind. But that is, in fact, a very little painful problem. I say little in that most of the big titles that are affected by this, like when I was at Warner Brothers, we could not distribute East of Eden for a long time until we made a new deal with the Steinbeck estate. So that's an example of that. But I thank you to the gentleman. Christmas Holiday is a very, very odd choice for MGM to have lent out Gene Kelly. It's a really, really good film, and it deserves to be released. If Universal can clear the rights, then they can release it, if they know they own it.
First of all,
and that brings up a whole other thing that we could talk about, how most of the studios, in fact, don't know what they own. And that's a problem.
Well, I just want you to I just want you to know how great it was that I just proved that somebody can mention any movie, and not only do you know what it is, you know its disposition, and you've apparently delivered legal precedent about it. So again, thank you for being here, and you just proved why Let's Get Physical Media is the greatest internet show about home entertainment. Dieter, I would ask you, do you have a question for George about his early life and getting into the industry?
Well,
Are you going to make fun of him? Don't make fun of him.
no, of course not, Rob.
You can if you want.
He makes fun of me wantonly.
Considering all the development that we are seeing now, how long do we have physical media? Looking forward to.
Well, I want to finish. I'm going to answer your question, and then we'll go back, because I never really got to answer Robert's question about how I got into the home video business.
It doesn't matter. I can listen to you opine for hours.
So, I think physical media is going to be around a lot longer than anybody else, or than most people think so. I'm in my home office, and what you can see in back of me is some of my equipment, but what you can't see is that I have these massive amount of books, and you build a library of books, you build a library of films. If you have discs, of which I have thousands of every format, I don't have any CED discs, and I don't have any VHD discs, but every other format I have, and lots of tapes. To have the physical copy with beautiful packaging, or just to have a basically bland package or basic package with an awesome master with great quality of the movie inside, that's the goal. I mean, you can dress it up in a steelbook and put all sorts of extras and physical extras, a lot of which I was integral in developing earlier in my career. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the quality of the presentation. And we have yet to get to a point where anything can come close to delivering what we can now deliver on a 4K UHD Blu-ray disc. It's the consummate, it's the crest, it's the acme. So
okay,
So
but
you've got HD DVD too?
oh yes, I was
Yes, George.
of course.
Yes, my man. Yes, my man.
You know, I was in the middle of that because it was during my time at Warner Brothers. We had been developing HD DVD, and the company supported both formats. So I had both pieces of equipment, and this is a funny story. Being the head of catalog marketing at the time, I was so out of the gossip loop or the water cooler conversations that I actually bought my third HD DVD player 2 days before the CES announcement.
Wow.
So you didn't know about it, even if you were.
No one had told me, because, what do? I just, marketed and programmed the library. It might have been a nice idea, but it was, held in such secrecy by the corporate suite and by the patent people. And so I found out about it. And I said, damn, but I even have the LG combo player with the Blu-ray and the 200 that has the Blu-ray and the HD DVD.
Never heard about a combo player.
There were two of them. There were two models, and I got the second model. I think Best Buy was selling them off pretty cheap, and I decided it'd be cool to get one. So I've got one, and it still works, although I never use it.
I still got my Toshiba.
My very first Laserdisc player was the Pioneer CLD 900 combi player that played both Laserdiscs and CDs.
Oh, well, that they just stopped making that, I would say, in the last 8 to 10 years.
God damn it.
I mean, I think there was one place that was still selling it. I think they were in New England. But Pioneer kept making that model quietly long after making Laserdiscs had faded away.
By the way, we have apparently Justin Toner, one of our moderators, says the great Bill Hunt from the digitalbits.com has joined us in the chat and has questions for George. He says, George, oh, I love this one. Any chance of Speed Racer in 4K, the Wachowski Speed Racer? And what about the Max Fleischer Superman cartoons on Blu-ray?
Well, that Speed Racer, I have no.
Be careful here. Be careful.
I have never heard anyone talk about that film going to 4K.
God damn it! What the hell?
That being said, if the costs, which are still significantly very, very high, if the costs go down and the market widens and broadens, I wouldn't say it's out of the realm of possibility. A lot of people really like that film. I happen to be partial to the original animated series, but I thought the film was good too. But I've never heard it ever discussed, but I never thought there'd be a Matrix 4. So who knows?
That's what I'm saying. I mean, you know how studios always like to tie re-releases into their latest. They figure out, how do we market stuff? I'm just saying, with Matrix 4 coming out in December, and I mean, I understand, like, who knows what the future has in store, but if you ever had any weight or pull, I mean, the Speed Racer disc was, on a BD25? They don't even have, the sound was never what it could have been. Like, maybe, if you could talk to somebody somewhere about something, you might be able to say, yo, 4K Speed Racer, bruh. The sound would not be compressed. Put it out. I mean, could you do that? Like, if you had any pull anywhere ever, maybe just say, hey, Matrix 4, it is coming out. Why don't we re-release all of the Warner Brothers Wachowski catalog and put it out in 4K, huh? What about that? They put out the Matrix.
The Matrix trilogy did very, very well, obviously. It was a huge success, and that was very exciting to work on. And especially for me, the coolest thing was that the Atmos remix was done by exactly the same mixers and audio employees at Warner Brothers that worked on the picture for its initial release. But the tools they had at their disposition was an amalgam of state-of-the-art everything. And I went onto the dubbing stage and heard, samples of it, and I just couldn't get over it. And my first experience with that movie was opening day at the Chinese Theater.
Wow.
So I have a lot of affection for it. And that film single-handedly revolutionized DVD. It was the first DVD to sell over 1 million units. And it was the first DVD to have breakthrough enhanced content. The way that disc utilized a non-linear concept was brilliant, and that's primarily attributable to gentleman who unfortunately is no longer with Warner Brothers, as so many people are no longer with Warner Brothers. But Paul Hemstreet was the key person in charge of special features at Warner Brothers for over 20 years, and that was his innovation. So
I got to work with him on Superman Returns when I was working on the special features for that. Now, let me ask you this. With the remastering of so many films, like you just pointed out on The Matrix, the original sound designers came back to do the Atmos mix. We see a lot of, like, I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth, but when Studio Canal does, for instance, my beloved Basic Instinct in 4K, yeah, there's been some talk as to the color timing has a more teal and orange shift to it. And you have been involved with some of the great archival releases of all time. How important is it to get people that are involved or were involved with the original, hopefully the original production of the movies, or people that actually worked on films? How important is that when bringing a movie to home video or upgrading it to 4K?
Well, I think it's absolutely critical if it's possible. Many of the projects that I worked on, everybody involved was dead.
Right.
So what do you use for a reference? I would search high and low for dye transfer Technicolor prints, hoping, because just because something's a Technicolor print doesn't mean it was made correctly. It could have been a lab reject. And
right.
I've even run into that. But generally, you get a group of people together, and if you don't have the original DP or the director or someone who's really familiar, you try to find some kind of an archival reference. And that can be very difficult when you're dealing with films that were shot on Eastman negative and there were no dye transfer prints and everybody is dead and nobody associated with the film is alive. What I had to do on one picture from the early 80s was basically look at how the first Video Master was color corrected.
Wow.
1-inch analog, but it gave you the color that the director approved. The director is long dead. So that, and having a really talented colorist. And Warner Brothers has, I would say, I don't want to say disparaging things about anybody else, but the colorists at Warner Brothers Motion Picture Imaging are among the finest in the industry. And that's why so many other studios, Universal, Fox, Disney, when Disney and Fox were separate, I think every studio, with the exception of Columbia, because Grover Crisp at Columbia is so amazingly talented and lauded, and appropriately so. Virtually every other studio has done work at Warner Brothers Motion Picture Imaging. But yes, having those original people there, you brought up Superman Returns. When that was happening, that was when the Michael Thaw, Dick Donner recut of Superman 2, which was a project that I was championing, and I got the president of the division to sign the check because that cost millions of dollars. But how exciting was that to see Marlon Brando's name in the credits? And
dude, I first saw that at the Directors Guild with Richard Donner.
I was there.
Were you there? Yeah,
I was there. Yes, of course.
That was an amazing night. Seeing that was, seeing things you'd never seen. Superman 2, which is interesting, came out in Australia in 1980, in like December of 1980, but it was released domestically in June of 81.
Right.
And there was a lot, but I mean, I'd seen that movie. I was at the Grand Cinemas Alderwood in Linwood. It was like the opening of this theater, and it was the first time it was open, and they had a screening of Superman 2. To see it at the DGA with footage with Brando was a very strange and surreal and delightful experience. I mean, it was like, what? How is this possible? You conjured up magic, sir.
And for those who don't know, it was the intention originally to shoot both films back to back. The Salkinds, who were producing the films, Warner Brothers was just a distributor and only in certain markets.
Right.
There was later a settlement where we now have all rights in all media, with a handful of exceptions on 4. The ability to go back and get the Brando footage and put it the way it was supposed to be, basically when Dick Donner was fired from the movie, they brought in Richard Lester. I think everybody knows this. And the Salkinds decided, hey, we could save all this money we have to pay Marlon Brando again by putting him in the second film by just having Susanna York as his mother tell him what he needs to know. And so no one ever dreamed that we'd get to see it as it was originally conceived. That was the biggest thrill for me, and the joy it brought Mr. Donner, because as I made reference to, Michael Thaw was the person who was actually putting it together with Dick's blessing, and then Dick came in with Tom Mankiewicz and was so excited by what we were doing, and this is all being cut on film.
Yeah.
It was really, really amazing. And then he got behind it, and he started tweaking it more. And, I have so many projects that I have great fondness for and very proud of, but that particular effort was an amazing dream come true for a lot of people. That's the thing, is I'm one of the people. I'm a consumer. I know what I want, and that is what I have brought to my work. And I think that is what has given me the total lack of any loss of excitement and thrill for all of this. My passion for it and my dedication to it, and just knowing that there's still so much yet that needs to be done, it catapults my energy, and it makes me feel like I'm still 22. So I hope that stays that way.
Well, I think it comes through. Now, 200 Watt Studio, who asked you about Christmas holidays, says, Mr. Feltenstein, thank you so much for your answer. Your knowledge is amazing and inspiring. If I may, you are the Robert Osborne of physical media. Impressive to see you rattle off knowledge without a script. Amazing, sir.
A script actually is a thing that can be a downfall for me, because I love to go out and just speak without cards, notes, just speak. When I was at Warner Brothers for 24 years, and when I would have to go out and speak to the salespeople and explain to them what we were going to be releasing from the catalog and how they needed to go out there and sell it, I didn't have notes. I didn't have a script. I just did my thing, and I always was comfortable and excited, and it always went well. There was one time about 3 years ago where they had some event at the studio, and a group of people were brought in to see a special screening of the new restoration of The Wizard of Oz. And I wasn't given a teleprompter. I was given a script that I had to keep looking up and reading. I felt like, I don't want to use a politically incorrect word, I just felt like a developmentally challenged person. because I wasn't able to be me. I was reading what they said I had to say. And so, if I have time to practice it, that's fine. I can learn a script. But if you just hand it to me before I go out and I have to go, that's where I fail miserably. Loser.
Well, I got a 200 Watt Studio also says, Dieter, did you just come right from your Walmart manager job?
It looks like that way, and some other people in the chat said I look like the free guy. Free guy.
Ryan Reynolds. Well, I would say you're showing great respect to our guests by wearing a tie.
You said we have a guest. Put on a tie.
Yes. Well, sends in super chats, and she sends in her diamond super chats and says, "Hey, gents, hello, everyone." So thank you for that. Now, we have another question from Pod Racing Palpatine. Now, this is something I would have asked George, and I don't know if you can answer this, but man, this is something that I want to know. Pod Racing Palpatine says, I have a question for George. I have a question for George from Rob. What, are you putting me on the spot now? Will we ever see Harrison Ford in The Mosquito Coast on Blu-ray?
I hope so. The reason I can't give a definitive answer on that is The Mosquito Coast is not a Warner Brothers owned production.
Oh, okay.
And it is a Saul Zaentz company owned film.
Now, why don't you tell people who's Saul Zaentz? He's not a slouch. What else has Saul Zaentz produced?
A little picture called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, animated Lord of the Rings, Amadeus,
a few
not too shabby. And his company was Fantasy Films, and he also had a record company, Fantasy Records. So Creedence Clearwater Revival made it onto your LP thanks to Saul Zaentz. He was an amazing guy. I got to meet him. The Warner-Zaentz relationship goes back over 20 years and was subject to contract renewals. And when I departed Warner Brothers earlier this year, the Zaentz-Warner Brothers agreement was about to be renewed, but I don't know what happened after that. There's a 6-month black hole of lack of knowledge that I can't speak to. So hopefully they signed, and then hopefully that will be coming out. And there's also another movie in that library I know that people want to see on Blu-ray called The Unbearable Lightness of Being.
Bruh. Lena Olin. Yo. But that came out on Criterion, right?
I think in the Laserdisc days it may have.
Yeah. I mean, I think any young man or absolutely young woman, any person needs to own that movie. Because, my God.
It's a great film. And the folks at Criterion, who we'll be talking about in a minute, the folks at Criterion really wanted that film. So I was trying to make that happen before it was no longer possible. So the director has expressed his interest to see that Criterion would be the company that would handle that film if it ever came to Blu-ray.
That would be Philip Kaufman?
Yes.
The man who wrote the story for Raiders of the Lost Ark and who also wrote and directed The Wanderers and one of my favorite movies of all time.
The Right Stuff.
Hell yes, son. You know what's up, George. That's why I wanted to have you on the show. Since you brought up Criterion, we had a seismic announcement, probably the biggest announcement in home video, I don't know, maybe of the last 20 years. Criterion announced this week that they are, and one of the reasons I wanted to get you on the show, they are going to finally move into 4K. And they always tout the fact that they've remastered their films in 4K, but they had yet to release 4K UHD disc. And this week, they announced it. They didn't just announce one title. They came out guns blazing with a cornucopia of amazing titles in 4K. And one of the things I will ask you, what I wanted to get you here to ask you this one question. What do you think of Criterion's announcement moving into 4K? What does it mean? And how did you feel about the titles they picked to jump into the format with?
Well, I'll answer the question sideways. I'll start with the fact that I love the broad diversity of what was announced and the different kind of filmmaking that is represented in what they announced. So that's the first thing. The second thing is they waited about 3 years before they went into Blu-ray. They wanted to make sure the format was really strong enough to support their kind of films. Because when there have been new formats, the obvious kind of film that would immediately take off would be, sci-fi, action, 5.1, 7.1 Atmos, big booming explosions, but 80-year-old black and white movies, question mark when the format is first beginning. And we saw this with DVD, and we saw it with Blu-ray, really, and now we're seeing it with 4K, and the timing is just perfect. I had conversations with the folks with Criterion for the last 2 years. I consider them friends. I almost consider them family. They are a wonderful group of passionate, intelligent, and extraordinarily dedicated people who care so much about making the best product. And I kind of, I get kind of angry when I read people taking pot shots at them because now they have a slew of imitators. And imitators is the best form, and imitation is the best form of flattery. But they were the ones that got it all started that, hey, you can do more than just put a movie out into the home video business.
Well, back to 1984, I remember, I was very heavily involved in home video. I was a retailer myself. I started working in home video when I was 13 for Weston Nishimura, the founder of the VSDA, at his video space stores in Seattle. And in 84, Criterion jumped into the scene with their first Laserdisc releases, which were King Kong and Citizen Kane on CAV Laserdisc. So to see that Criterion, their 4K launch title, well, one of them, I think it's what they're leading with, is Citizen Kane in 4K, seems to be, what is it, 37 years since they jumped into the home video market? Isn't it pretty poetic? And I think what an amazing thing.
It is poetic justice. I was the kind of not just point person, but I was very involved in Criterion getting into business with Warner Brothers, and I managed the relationship until I left the company, not of my own choosing. And one of the last things I did before I had to leave was to go to the powers that be and said, Criterion would like to do this, and I think it's a fantastic idea. And I talked to them about it from the perspective of being the keeper of the library up until that point. And I felt there was great poetic justice to them taking the film that began what became a whole differentiation of what home entertainment could be, more than just the movie, is I think what they used to say back in the early days of Criterion. That was kind of their marketing moniker. And no one had imagined anything like that, where there'd be a commentary and contextualization. But they were the first to do it. Those two films were the first to do it with, and they were phenomenal choices. And it just felt right. Obviously, the more successful it will be, Warner Brothers will participate in that success as a participant in their activity financially. But everyone wins. Everyone wins. And most importantly...
That's your dad, by the way.
Obviously, my putting the receiver in my bottom drawer so the telephone wouldn't upset this.
Oh no, it's all good.
Work.
I mean, who knows? Maybe it's some big studio bigwig asking you whether or not you will, in fact, make sure someday that Wild Wild Planet is released on Blu-ray. No pressure. Just saying, George.
You're getting a complete wish list today.
So I mean, you know, the Criterion actually it spanned multiple studios. Their release, you know, it wasn't just one studio. How was Criterion able? You know, obviously you have talked about the goodwill that you have for Criterion. I have to say, when I first moved to Los Angeles in 1988. The Criterion offices were on the beach in Santa Monica. And it was amazing. And I had bought their CAV release of 2001, A Space Odyssey, on CAV disc. And I actually rode my bike to the Criterion offices to pick it up. And I that was the only time I was at it was like a hippie crash pad, man. There were kids or little babies around, and there was all these people, and I'm like, man, I'm just here to pick up my 2001 Laserdisc. And they're like, oh, no, come in. And I told them where I worked. I said I worked at Silver Platters in Seattle, and I'd worked for Weston Ishimura. And they're like, oh, my God, you know. And it was like this magical, it was like being in Santa's workshop, where I'm like, oh, my God, these people are just like me. And they live on the beach in Santa Monica at this office, and they've got 2001 for me on Laserdisc. I'm like, this is the greatest place to work in history. And I have great love for Criterion.
Well, and it got better at the time. At that time, Criterion was actually a joint venture between a company called Voyager Press, which was an educational publisher, I believe, or a specialized publisher, and Janus Films, which was a legendary, by that time, leader in the distribution of foreign and art motion pictures in media of all sorts for a long period of time. And Janus was in New York, and Voyager was in that building, which was condemned, I believe, about 3 or 4 years after your visit.
Yeah, I know.
Right near the Santa Monica Pier.
Yep.
But the Voyager people lived in the building, and the Criterion office was there.
It was the best thing I've ever... I mean, it literally was the closest I ever got to Santa's workshop.
And from my understanding, I think it was in the early 90s, the Voyager people and the Criterion people separated the business out, and it totally became a Janus Criterion organization. But those early years, the spirit that they had behind what they did is completely intact in terms of wanting filmmakers to be completely happy with what they would do, and really trying to leave no stone unturned to try to make everything the best that it could be. And that is not only still in their company, but I think it is at an all-time high because they haven't ever rested on their laurels. They continue to, I think, just be one of a handful of companies that can be depended on. It's like, go back 25 years. If you heard the word Disney, you knew quality family, right? Disney means something else now, but when you hear the word Criterion, you're hearing something that is equal to perfection. And I think one of the nicest compliments that we had when I was overseeing the Warner Archive collection was that our masters, the new restorations that we were creating for Blu-ray in the more recent years, were of equal to Criterion in quality.
Okay.
And that was the best compliment you could get.
I got to stop you since you brought it up. Warner Archive, my beloved Warner Archive, that I've been, they were not so much lately, but I used to tweet about Warner Archive all the time, and they would always answer me. And I would always say, my beloved Warner Archive is bringing Don't Be Afraid of the Dark to Blu-ray. And I couldn't believe that if you actually looked at Warner Archive discs, the bit rate of the Warner Archive movies was higher than the bit rate on standard Warner Brothers studio releases.
You can blame me for that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, bro. I mean, come on, dude. That was some fantastic shit. You were bringing out stuff and using MPI, which is motion picture imaging, on the Warner lot that you spoke about earlier. I mean, you were making sure that idiots like myself and Dieter were getting the best quality. I mean, if someone, I know Pretty Maids All in a Row has only come out on DVD, but come on, you were making sure we got the stuff. I mean, if you were a drug dealer, and let's face it, Warner Archive is the next best thing to a giant mound of Peruvian flake, you were making sure you were making sure we got the good stuff, the pure, uncut, high bit rate video delivery service that we all wanted. How were you able to do that? And how did you personally oversee that kind of thing from a technical standpoint? And by the way, I have to ask, there's a great question. JJ the Jet fan asks, and this is part of this question, how do colorists working on remasters decide how to grade in HDR? Who makes the final call on archival grading, and the differences between something like HDR and Dolby Vision?
Easy question, George.
Come on, man.
It is more than one person. What I was the only 4K HDR title that I had a lot of involvement in, was The Wizard of Oz.
Also in 3D.
The 3D version happened at a time because there was a period of time where Warner Home Entertainment retail pretty much had gotten out of the catalog business, except for re-releasing the same titles in a new box and throwing crap in the box. And it abused the whole concept. I had developed the Ultimate Collector's Edition, and I was quoted in a magazine as saying, "We're never going to be the company that releases the Letters of Transit Edition of Casablanca." And then when I was not involved, they actually did that. Putting an umbrella and Singing in the Rain, instead of, the money needed to go into the master, and the consumer really didn't need that. They needed the best quality, and things like spending $1 million restoring a movie and then putting a 4:3 standard definition trailer on the disc instead of remastering the trailer. I mean, little things like that were an easy fix. So with Warner Archive, it was all up to me. And I said, we must use, bitrate cannot go below 30 for live action films. And if it's, we want to go for the best bitrate we can. If it's episodic television, it can't go below 25. And BD50 if the running time is more than 90 minutes. I mean, things like that. They're little minor things that make a big difference. And then if you have a monofilm, having your audio come out of your center channel speaker, which is your weakest speaker, that made no sense to me. So that's why we had left, right, equal mono. And using original key art was a big thing for me.
Dude, come on.
Because Photoshop heads just don't do it. And so we were just starting before things went south. The release of Curse of Frankenstein, which we had been working on for 2 years, and using all 3 aspect ratios so that no one could say they didn't get what they wanted. Even though we knew the 1:3:7 open matte was never intended for showing in theaters, 30 or 40 years worth of people grew up watching that version and expected. And what had happened was that the DVD had actually tilted and scanned the image, so there was no way you could see the tops of buildings you had seen in the old DVD without using the 1:3:7. And we did spend extra money on creating special features, which we normally didn't do. And I knew the fan base was out there. I knew how terrible we had rights all over the world except for the UK. And I know how terrible people felt about what had been released in the UK. And so that was recreated from the separations because the original camera negative had faded so terribly. And the results of that were so gratifying. And the fan response was so gratifying. And I'm hoping that someday, some way, that kind of thing can continue in some fashion.
Well, George, 200 Watt Studio, to follow this up, and by the way, 200 Watt Studio and I, as I like to say, park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. 200 Watt Studio says, Mr. Feltenstein, did you have... Oh, I love this question. I can't wait to hear this answer.
I'm scared.
No, don't be scared. Did you have anything? Did you have anything to do with the Blu-ray? Oh, say it with me now. Of the Bermuda Depths.
Everything.
If so, thank you. And both versions are stunning. Now, before you answer this question, I have to say that there are movies that people see in their lives that, for whatever reason, stick with them. That they never forget. They're indelible in your brain. One of these, for me, was The Bermuda Depths, which is a movie that is a kaiju film on one hand, a special effects from a Japanese company. It has a giant turtle. But on the other hand, it's about a beautiful ghost girl played by Connie Selica. It even has an amazing romantic theme song. There is nothing about, and it was a TV movie. I saw it as a TV movie, like ABC when they put out, like half what Warner Archive has specialized in putting out all of the TV movies that I, as a kid, remember, whether it was Bad Ronald, whether it was Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, My God, on Blu-ray, thank you so much. Tell me about the Bermuda Depths, brah. How'd you do that? How did you bring that goodness to
Well,
both
we were
DVD and high
very
def?
fortunate there. First of all, to go back to the beginning, because we're going all over the place here, but why
I know,
not?
but it's a rollicking conversation.
The idea for Warner Archive began with the gentleman who eventually rose to the presidency of Warner Brothers Home Entertainment, Jim Wuthridge. He came to me in 2002 or 2003 and saw I had been working on a soundtrack CD joint venture we had with Rhino Records of releasing limited edition CD soundtracks. When they're gone, and you can only buy them on the internet. And he saw the CDs and he asked me about it. I explained their business model, and he said to me, gosh, this is like the long tail marketing. We have like 1,500 movies on DVD and Blu-ray, but we had 4,100 movies on VHS. How do we get to the long tail? How do we get to these more obscure things? A manufacture on demand concept was what he eventually came up with. And it wasn't until 2006 that he got the initiative approved. At the time, he wasn't the president of the division, by the way. He was the heading up, working in digital distribution. And so we had this task force for 2 years, and I was brought in to program it. And it was kind of this shot in the dark thing that we were going to try. And since I was well versed in the theatrical part of the catalog and had released a lot of it, one thing that was a pain point for me was I had no access to any of the television content. It was handled by a different division. So I was seeing TV series and TV movies, made for TV movies, that people were desperate for that weren't available except through illicit means of piracy. And
we don't talk about that.
All you have to do is mention the P word to me and I go ballistic, because, as far back as the late 1990s when I was dealing with these CDs we were making, and they were being pirated in Europe. And I was like, this is like stealing from my house. And it's going to cost people their jobs. And of course, it did. It is you can't even imagine, people bringing in webcams and filming new movies in the theater. And it's just completely out of control. And in some cultures, it's actually acceptable to steal for some reason. And it's a horrific problem. But I noticed that I was keeping track of these websites where they were selling movies that were out of print or movies that had never been made available on bootleg DVD-Rs. And so we launched the Warner Archive on March 23rd, 2009 with 150 theatrical feature films. When I left, it was about 3,500 releases.
Dude, so good. Can we just talk about, let's just talk about how great Warner Archive is. We don't have to, you're talking about it right now, but I just want to say thank you, because by God do I love Warner Archive. I got The Hunger on Blu-ray because of Warner Archive. I do have Don't Be Afraid of the Dark and that beautiful The Bermuda Depths. So I don't know, George. I mean, to me, you're like Willy Wonka and Howard Hughes all rolled into one. So
and specifically, the made-for-television movies were the most egregiously overlooked category. And in the first year of Warner Archive, I think it was August of 2009, we jokingly referred to the releases that month as Bootlegger's Greatest Hits. It was all made for TV movies, and it was stuff, it was definitely Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, definitely Bad Ronald, The Deliberate Stranger with Mark Harmon. It was just outrageous to me that no one had seen the value of this. And it just is indicative of you have to have someone who knows
Right.
the content. And the problem is that before I started working at MGM Home Video, we never got to that story. But MGM Home Video is where I started my career in the home video business. I sent them a resume. One morning, they had me interview that night, and they said, "We want to hire you. We just don't know when." I didn't get to start till 8 months later, and it turned out to be with the knowledge that I had to move from New York to Los Angeles, and I was like a Woody Allen-esque Manhattanite. So the idea of moving to Los Angeles was anathema to me. Best decision I ever made in my life, and I loved New York when I lived there. I haven't been there since 2005, and that's just fine with me. But the point of it is that most of the people who make decisions of what gets released or what got released didn't know a damn thing about what the movies were. They were just names on a page.
Well, now to that end, first of all, when did you get hired by MGM? What year?
It was 1987. February 1987 was my start date.
Okay, now I have to ask you. A question. So Pony in Japan.
Yes, they were our licensee.
They released the first letterboxed laser discs. That there were two discs that came out letterboxed before. One was MGM and it was Manhattan. And
right.
The letterboxing was gray. It wasn't black, which was weird. And Warner Brothers did release the color purple, slightly letterboxed. But in Japan, it was Pony. They released 2001, 2010, The Hunger, The Time Machine, and I want to say Clash of the Titans on Laserdisc. And they were the first letterboxed CAV discs that I ever got, and I was importing them where I worked. I worked at Silver Platters, and they were hideously expensive. They were like $150. Didn't matter. I'm like, 2001 letterbox? Yes, sir. Bring it on. This is pre-Criterion releasing it in in 88, I think. Did you have anything to do with that? And was that I'm completely asking you the most weird, obscure question.
No, it's actually wonderful because I didn't even know about that, or if I did, I forgot about it. I'm wondering about the chronology because when I got to MGM, I knew a little bit about Laserdisc, and I had toyed with the idea of Laserdisc or maybe even CED in the early 80s. It was expensive, but I wanted stereophonic sound.
Right.
And I had the first Beta Hi-Fi machine in all of Manhattan. I had to borrow money from my parents to buy it. And of course, then came VHS Hi-Fi, and Beta was never going to happen. But the Harold Pony thing brings up something very interesting. When I got the job at MGM and I started there, I got a call early in my tenure there from Doug Pratt, who is the editor of the Laserdisc newsletter.
Which was the Bible at the time.
It was the Bible at the time, and this was how people got their information of whether a Laserdisc was good enough.
Yep.
And he called me as a stranger out of the blue and said, "So you're the new programming guy at MGM?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "So what are you going to do about Laserdiscs?" Because at the time, MGM was releasing Laserdiscs that were just not particularly impressive or special, or they were just nadir. There was nothing special about them. And he and his wife, Doug and his wife, lived around the corner from my apartment, so he invited me to see what Laserdisc looked like, and I got hooked real bad, real fast, and got MGM involved in a Laserdisc program. And by, I think, December of 1988, I'm there a year and a half, we had remastered Ben-Hur and Dr. Zhivago in letterbox Laserdisc and got half the funding from Harold Pony in Japan because everybody thought I was nuts. Nobody's going to want to see those black bars on the TV, And I said, I want to see the black bars on the TV. Since I was a little kid, pan and scan used to drive me crazy. I wanted to see the full image and not, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers being Evan Bride Foe. You just see the middle of the movie. So we spent a lot of money to do that. It was the first time a studio had gone back and remastered something specifically for Laserdisc, unless this Harold Pony thing was before that, which is very possible that it was.
It was a little bit before that, but they only put out those 5 films, and they were genre releases. But I have to say, since you brought it up, I'm fascinated. So one of the things about MGM that obviously was part of your tenure was the packaging. You guys moved into these beautiful gatefold sleeves, and they were heavy gauge cardboard. And for collectors like myself, it was like a revelation. I mean, it was amazing. I remember getting Logan's Run, on this beautiful gatefold, unbelievable package. And
it was a remastered reissue of Logan's Run because the first disc looked like garbage.
It looked like ass. I mean, it was horrific.
Yeah.
And getting it in widescreen, I mean, that movie, I saw it opening night. My mom took me when I was 9. I went to the John Dan Cinema in Bellevue, Washington, and saw it. And it was a before pre-Star Wars. It came out in '76, and it blew me away. And I'll never forget when I bought that disc. I'd actually worked on a music video, and the artist flew us to Vegas, and I'd won a bunch of money. And I come back from Vegas, and I went to a record store that no longer exists, Aaron's Records, and I went there at like 10 a.m. and I'm like, I know Logan's Run had just come out, and I went and bought it with my Vegas winnings. And
that's spectacular.
I bring it home. I'm like, oh my God. I live in this great apartment in Los Feliz, and it ruled. And there I was at 10:30 watching Logan's Run in my awesome apartment. It was like and I had a thunderous surround sound system and listening to that Jerry Goldsmith score. It was amazing. Thank you for that, George.
That's something that, ideally, that's one of the many hundreds of titles that need to be revisited and upgraded. And that's a whole other
You mean in 4K? Would you say that Logan's Run needs to come out in 4K, George?
Ideally, yes, but I think we're a little premature in that being around the corner. But ideally, I know it would make a profit. So you have to start these things delicately, and we're really in the infancy of catalog content in 4K because it's a chicken or the egg thing, because people aren't going to make the investment to the players and upgrading their systems unless there are titles that they want. And if the only thing that's available are the new theatricals, and these people like classic films, and when I say classic films, I'm also referring to what is now an old classic. To me, it's a recent film, but Shawshank Redemption is a perfect example. The movie's 25 years old.
Right.
When I was a kid, Singing in the Rain was 25 years old, so everything is relative. But that's obviously going to be a phenomenal disc and would just like a no-brainer for 4K. But when you're going back further, Logan's Run would have to be explained to certain people involved in the decision as to what it is. And, that's really the problem. The consumer knows what it is, and it's a specialized consumer. That's why Warner Archive was able to achieve the level of success year after year after year, increasing profits and revenues. because we were going for the very educated, sophisticated, enlightened audience that knew what these things were and worshipped Wild Wild Planet.
Well, I would say that at MGM, I mean, would you say that your influence there? I mean, their Laserdisc program, their releasing of classic films, really transformed, markedly so, after your arrival. I mean, it was a huge difference.
I was hired to be the director of programming for MGM UA Home Video. And I started putting library titles on the release schedule. And it was everything from classic MGM films to the James Bond movies that had just reverted from CBS Fox. So that was a very, very exciting process. At the same time, I started building the Laserdisc release schedule, which was 3 or 4 titles a month, and saying, okay, we've got to go back and remaster this movie. It needs to have chapters. It needs to have an attractive package. And, you know, all the films that were anamorphic needed to come out letterbox. So I had 2 roles. I actually also took on the job of Laserdisc sales and marketing. So I actually got a sales commission on the sales that I made. So it was, you know, I always say to be a good marketer, you need to know what the salesman has to deal with. And to be a good salesperson, you need to know what a marketer has to deal with. And I was always in the position at that point of doing both. And so it really helped build our Laserdisc business. Suddenly, Laserdisc revenues and profits were like quintupled within a few months. And of course, the video cassette business was 2 or 3 times what it had been because the catalog was being monetized. So it was very successful.
So what you're saying is, wow, they hired somebody who knew and respected their own assets, and you were able to do something with them and made a huge profit.
Yes.
Go figure.
Amazing, right? It's not rocket science. This is not a joke, and no offense meant towards anybody, but before I got to MGM, the way they would decide what to release as a library release was they would pick a title out of the big coffee table book, the MGM story, and they would like go, let's do this one. Let's do this one. And this, I'm not joking about it. I mean, they did not understand. You're seeing the same thing now with these massive sub-licensing deals that a lot of studios have made where they basically have licensed off their libraries because some bean counter comes in and makes a list of titles and says, okay, let's see how much we can get for these. And they bid it out, and whoever pays the highest price wins. And they don't have any reverence for the film as it is as an individual item.
Well,
that's why the Criterion approach of meticulously selecting what motion pictures are part of the Criterion collection. That's why they made such a great partner, and Warner Brothers eventually decided to break the sub-licensing as a rule with Criterion, and it only was a success story for both companies from the beginning until, you know.
Well, to say that, Brian Doyle sends in a chat and says, why haven't any boutique labels offered George a job? I'm like, I'll answer that. They can't afford you, George. They can't afford you.
We'll move on to the next question.
And well, the next question is Danzig, 1979, says, do you know if a 4K disc of Robin Hood Prince of Thieves is in the cards? Thanks. And did you see that Superman the Animated Series is getting a Blu-ray release in October? I did see that. I'm very excited. But what do you think? Are we going to get... I mean, I would say probably. That was a pretty big, you know, despite people make fun of Kevin Costner's accent, Robin Hood Prince of Thieves is a pretty respectable film. People like
I think it would do fine. And the thing is, I don't it was a production of Morgan Creek, but Warner Brothers invested in it. So as a result, we lost the domestic rights to the Morgan Creek Library several years ago. I'd say five years ago, but not Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, because it was a co-financed title. I can see that being something. There would have to be an analysis done. You have to deliver profit to the shareholders in a public company, and I think that film, which is now, drum roll please, 30 years old.
Oh my God.
Oh, exactly. I can't deal. 30 years, really? That film would do very well as a 4K. And it was shot on film, so you get this benefit of scanning the original negative at 4 or 8K and coming out with a beautiful master of film, pending that there's nothing wrong with the negative, which there probably shouldn't be and wouldn't be. The results should be gorgeous, and hopefully it could be very profitable. But again, one of the things that constricts 4K catalog is the customer base, the install base. I was hoping that 5 million PS5s with 4K drives would help that. And I think we're starting to see, with Paramount doing things like the Ten Commandments and the Indiana Jones movies.
Almost Famous.
And thank God the Star Trek movies are starting to come out.
Oh, yeah.
We're seeing that. Columbia has been doing some great stuff. And Universal released some Hitchcocks. This is what we need to see across the industry, and it will allow the people at Warner Brothers who make these decisions to look at competitive information and see, oh, well, if Ten Commandments sold X, then we can do Ben-Hur because it's an even better movie, and it's also Heston, and it's the same kind of biblical spectacle, and it won 11 Academy Awards, and it should be on Blu-ray.
Well,
4K. Excuse me, Freudian slip there.
Yeah, let me ask you this. I mean, obviously, Jason Kilar, who is no longer he's there for a while.
He is the CEO until otherwise, until the new merger goes through.
One of the interesting things that I thought that he was talking about, obviously, the streaming services for me are always an interesting thing because, like, I love Disney Plus because ultimately everything that Disney has ever done should hopefully wind up on Disney Plus. It's a repository for the entire studio's legacy, and to have it in one place, I like that idea, but I want it in 4K, in Atmos, and yet it's still streaming. It'll never be as good as having a disc, but still everything needs to be remastered in 4K. Now, in the case of Warner Brothers, we saw recently they spent a lot of money doing the Snyder Cut of Justice League, which was an amazing thing that Warner Brothers did. I mean, I don't think without HBO Max it never would have happened. And if you read about how that came about, it was an amazing thing that they did. However, it was only released on physical media in 4K in Europe, and which I have a beautiful steelbook. Thank you to the lovely Emma Bannon for purchasing that for me and sending it here to the States. I got the Excalibur cover if you want to know. So I wonder, how can we convince, other than buying things, as consumers, we all want 4K. The people watching this show want the best remasters, even if something's on a streaming service in 4K, in Dolby Atmos. We still want to buy it. And is there a future? And I know Warner Brothers is finally putting out the Snyder Cut here in the States, but it will have been 6 or 8 months or a year. And all the people that want it, we imported it already. So does 4K have a future? And can it coexist with streaming?
I do believe it has a future, and I certainly hope so. You know, I remember going to a seminar that I believe was an Amazon presentation in 2011, where they were showing what their predictions were for home entertainment. And they were looking at, they weren't even really considering the impact that streaming was going to have. And they really couldn't have envisioned that it would take off the way that it did. Or maybe they could, you know, but what they were saying was digital sell-through and digital rental would eventually eclipse physical media by 2016, and by 2016 DVD would be gone.
Wow.
And by and large, and the pandemic has kind of changed a lot of things that don't necessarily, we don't know if they're going to continue that way or not, but the amount of product that is sold on DVD, a format that people thought should have been superseded. I'm very glad that it is not, because there are a lot of people for whom the DVD is more than satisfactory. And the heartbreak for me personally, and this goes back many years, had there not been a format war between Blu-ray and HD DVD, and had there been a visionary like Warren Lieberfarb, who was the head of Warner Home Video for 20 years, and there were 3 competitive DVD formats before the launch of DVD. Warner Brothers had a deal with Toshiba, Sony had something in development, and Panasonic, which at that time was owned by Matsushita, the parent company of Panasonic. So there were 3 competitive DVD formats. And it was Warren who brokered a deal that made sure there was a little bit for the other partners, so that the whole industry could unify, combine their efforts, join forces, and with one format, no beta VHS, no Blu-ray, HD DVD, one format, DVD, come out guns blazing, have lots of titles available. Biggest success in the history of consumer electronics, at least up until that time. Maybe something has superseded it. By having competitive formats for 2 years, crucial years of high definition, I think did irreparable damage to the ability of people to convert to Blu-ray.
Yeah.
A lot of people also, you know, the leap from tape or even Laserdisc to high def HD DVD or Blu-ray was, I mean, I'll say that again. The leap from videotape and Laserdisc to DVD was massive, because you had all this, you know, you had the ability to have chapters and special features and things that the Laserdisc market was very, very limited. So DVD was embraced by the masses, and Warren had envisioned you had to get the price of manufacturing down low enough that people could afford to buy at a very reasonable price. And that's why DVD took off the way it did.
It was incredible. It was incredible.
Not enough people got to see how much better Blu-ray was or HD DVD was, because they were basically, I mean, Blu-ray offered the BD50 earlier than HD DVD offered the 30, I think it was.
Yep.
But they basically were of kind of equal quality. But early on, people were putting their bets on Blu-ray, and yet Blu-ray didn't convey what it was as clearly to the civilian, whereas HD DVD is clear, high definition DVD. So the format war caused a lot of lost opportunity, and then the economic collapse right after that, the loss of specialized video retailers. I don't think we as an industry ever recovered from that. But the rise of digital delivery through EST and VOD helped to fill in the cracks and keep home entertainment vital. So in a perfect world, ideally, you should have the choice of streaming, renting, buying digitally, or buying physically. And it's all what your preference is. It shouldn't be limited. Right. And I hope that will be the future, that people will have choice. And those who want the very, very best right now, and for the foreseeable future, the very, very best is that 100 gigabyte 4K Blu-ray disc.
Well, now let me ask you this. I mean, obviously, I always say on this show, on my observations, that it ain't show friends, it's show business, which is something that I stole from Camera Crow's script from Jerry Maguire. Obviously, it all comes down to money. And doing a 4K remaster of a film is not cheap. It costs a lot of money. You have to clean that negative, you have to scan it, then there's other work that has to be done. So, people ask, well, why isn't this out? What we have a question, and I'll ask you this. I don't know if you know the answer, but Marv Dogger 2 asks, why is the Abyss and True Lies not on Blu-ray or 4K? What gives? I mean, we got Dieter and I bootlegs. Well, one day Dieter will get his bootleg of the Abyss.
Don't talk of such things.
Oh, sorry. I wouldn't say that. I didn't buy it from Stinky Tuna. Oh, wait. No, I'm just kidding. So, but the question is, obviously, Lightstorm has 4 movies. The Abyss, True Lies, Soderbergh's remake of Solaris, and Catherine Bigelow's Strange Days. Solaris and Strange Days were out in Germany. Thank you, Dieter Bastian, because you sent them to me. Well, you sent me Solaris as a beautiful media book.
Strange Days you already had.
Yeah, and I Strange Days was a god for me before. But I would ask George, I mean, I would think that future-proofing a studio's library, that is their greatest asset. And in the streaming world, every piece of content becomes valuable. So if there's a movie that's sitting in a library that is not remastered and is not on streaming, I would think a studio, especially with HBO Max, put everything out. Let's remaster the entirety of whatever Warner Brothers has, because someone's going to watch it. You talk about the long tail. If it's on HBO Max, it'll be there forever. So why not spend the money? And it might be expensive today, but 25 years from now, people will still be streaming it.
You're speaking from a place of rational thought and intelligence. And for Warner Brothers, which has the entertainment industry's largest library by far, and I'm biased, but I think it's the best, but the largest library, the percentage of content that still exists in standard def only would shock you.
Oh, no,
I know. So an investment needs to be made. And to be fair, I know particularly of a very famous Disney television series where Disney did not want to pay to remaster in HD, no less 4K. So it's not on Disney Plus. There's a lot of things.
George, who's the leader of that club?
Made for You and Me?
Yeah.
I don't know. But the thing is that this is the reality. They don't have their whole library up there.
Right.
They have the biggest and brightest, but they don't have the one and only genuine original family band. They don't have the Boatniks, or maybe they do. I don't have Disney Plus, and so I can't tell you what they do or don't have.
Well, the world
But
is
I
a
know-
lesser place because they don't have the Boatniks if they don't have it up there now.
Right, but Charlie the Lonesome Cougar, and all those things. Like, are those all there? Bon Voyage with Fred McMurray, is that there?
Well, look, they got That Darn Cat, which I'd never seen until I had Disney Plus, and I am a better man for it. But don't you think they eventually will?
I hope so. I hope everything gets, regardless of who owns it or what it is. I think everything needs to be restored, remastered, and preserved.
Agreed.
Especially when we're dealing with things. This is the oddity. We have to worry about the oldest films, and we also have to worry about things that were made in the early days of digital, when formats were a little wonky. And, I know of certain digital intermediates where they found missing files and D-hits, not at Warner Brothers, but at other studios. There needs to be an overall initiative to preserve the integrity of our cinematic history and legacy. And that includes television. And television preservation is much worse than film preservation.
Mm.
But this is an industry-wide call-out, and it can't just be... It has to be where it makes commercial sense, but it can't just be, hey, we've got this nitrate negative that's starting to decompose. It's a very obscure movie. Regardless, protect it, because that obscure movie could suddenly become interesting to somebody in 3 or 5 years. Protect your library. There's a film that was made many, many years ago called The Race to Save 100 Years. And a former boss of mine, the late Roger Meyer, who was the president of Turner Entertainment Company and was at MGM for 25 years before that, is really the father of film preservation at the studio level. And he passed away a couple of years ago. I had the great good fortune to work for him for a few years. And he said, we should make a film about film preservation, which he did do. And in that film, he interviewed Martin Scorsese. And Scorsese says in that movie, you take care of your film libraries, Hollywood, because those libraries will take care of you. So...
Well, but how then, in this day and age where obviously the studios are publicly held corporations and they have shareholders to answer to, and you're talking about, what are we going to make for the fiscal quarter? Whereas I would say that film preservation, you preserve a film now in 4K and Dolby Atmos or whatever, it's going to make money for you forever.
Well, I can only say that if you were looking at the industry, let's say in 1980, you really didn't have the lucrative home video and paid television revenues that lay ahead. Basically, before home video and paid television, if you had a 16 millimeter picture and track for syndication, you were set. So it's horrifying to think of what has been tossed away because of storage costs by certain myopic companies, not major studios, but more independents and things like that, and more in TV than features, but that we've lost because of that kind of thinking. But as technology has progressed, preservation has become more and more important. And I would say probably in the 1980s, most studios didn't, with the exception of MGM and Disney, most studios didn't have dedicated staff to preservation and restoration. MGM and Disney started converting nitrate to safety in the 1960s. By the 1980s, people were looking at that, and by the 1990s, studios were getting a little more serious about it. And once we got to the land of high def and the new millennium, virtually every studio had some kind of preservation department. Warner Brothers specifically is carrying on the preservation program that Mr. Meyer started at MGM, because MGM bought Turner. Turner bought MGM, and then Time Warner bought Turner, and now AT&T is the owner of what used to be Time Warner, now is Warner Media. But every year there was a preservation budget, and that preservation budget, even during the darkest days at MGM, when Criterion was, throwing things out and auctioning things, there was continued film preservation. And you always need that film to go back to. And the film needs to be constantly checked. And it's not just nitrate, but also safety film, which we didn't know until the 1980s can succumb to vinegar syndrome. And 80s films, we knew about the color fading of Eastman color. But my good friend Bob Harris, who restored Lawrence of Arabia in the late 80s, and his restorations are, legend.
Yeah.
Bob said to me that, it really wasn't until he was working on Lawrence of Arabia that the whole concept of vinegar syndrome deterioration started to become known in the industry. So you may think you're protected because film elements were made in the 60s or 70s, but if nobody's opened up that can, and you open up that can and it blows you across the room because of the fumes and the vapors, you're in trouble. So what's going on now at Warner Brothers, and has been for about 5 years, is what we call, jokingly, preservation on steroids. They are not just preserving the most prestigious movies and going back to them, but they're also going to an old unsold TV pilot that may only exist on a 3/4 inch tape with time code, if that's all that exists. Everything is being digitized and stored on multiple servers in case a server goes down. And it is a remarkable achievement that these people have undertaken. And we, the consumers, are benefiting from that. And other studios are doing preservation like that. I know that Sony has done something like that with Grover Crisp. When Sean Belston was at Fox, he had a similar program going on. Universal had a program like that going on. So there's more knowledge at a higher level of these things are not corporate assets alone. They're works of art and corporate assets, and you must take care of them so they'll be there for you in the future.
Which is amazing. And to speak that, this is kind of funny. Danzig 1979 sends in another question and says, "Thank you, George, for spending your time with us tonight. This may sound odd, but do you know who has the rights to the 1977 live-action Spider-Man television show?"
That's Nicholas Hammond, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, actually. That's
what? There's something you don't know?
Yeah. When it comes to independently produced television series, and my knowledge falls off a cliff when you get into more recent stuff, because There's just so many things out there and so many little companies, and it just that's not my area of strength.
200 Watt Studio says, one of the first Laserdiscs I bought was Bad Day at Black Rock. That was a Criterion disc. Actually, a friend of mine named Mary Forrest gave that disc to me because it has John Sturges' commentary on it, which is golden. I hope that comes to Blu-ray or 4K. What do you think about that?
Well, the non-Criterion Blu-ray of Bad Day at Black Rock came out in 2016 from the Warner Archive.
Yes, it
looking
did.
Absolutely magnificent and sounding magnificent but without Mr. Sturges' commentary.
Yeah, bro. I'm not gonna hammer you on that. But what's up with that? Come on, man.
Now, just to be clear, Criterion has always had a policy since day one that if they created any kind of special feature, that it would not be made available to a third party. Now, that was their initial stance. I believe they have been open to a little bit of flexibility when it comes to that. At the time, we were doing Bad Day at Black Rock for Warner Archive. It just, you have to decide what your asks are going to be. And to have a commentary from a director who's passed away, especially Sturges' commentary, is fantastic.
It's fantastic.
You know, it just was something that we decided it was best not to open that door at the time. The best thing we could do was bring the film to Blu-ray, and it already had an HD master. It was showing on TCM in high definition. It looked really bad, but it was 15 years old. It came from a bad element. We started from scratch, maxed out bitrate, gorgeous picture, gorgeous track, phenomenal disc, big seller. Wish it could have had, you know, you have to make sacrifices at times. Not everything is possible. I think this comes up so often when I'm reading through all the forums and I see people say, why did they get so-and-so for a commentary?
Yeah.
Like it's that easy. And Rob, you know better than anybody that people just don't sit around saying, gee, I wish I could do a commentary, you know.
Dude, I'm still bummed David Warner is not in my documentary on the making of Tron. And I made that. That came out in 2002. I'm like, dude, I still think about it. Like, I got everyone else, but I couldn't.
Well,
I got Jeff Bridges, but no David Warner.
The perfect example of this is when we were getting ready to release the Americanization of Emily on DVD.
Arthur Hiller, man.
We wanted Julie Andrews and James Garner in the worst way. And
What a great movie, by the way.
Their people said no. We've since released it on Blu-ray with a brand new master. It looks gorgeous.
It's amazing, by the way. Amazing.
And a film everyone should see, since it still sadly isn't as well known as it should be.
It's so good.
But when it came out, we got calls from Julie Andrews and James Garner's people saying, Julie, why didn't you ask us? They would have loved to have done a commentary. But we did ask you.
Yeah.
Because if it had actually gone to the person rather than their rep or who was working for them that day.
Who doesn't even know what you're asking about.
Exactly.
They don't even know what an Americanization of Emily is. They have no idea.
Right. So it's very much, if you can get to the actual person, 9 times out of 10, they would love to do it.
Yep.
And, but it isn't an easy thing to get to and to make happen. It's even not a matter of cost. It's just getting people, they have lives.
Right.
And their lives aren't dedicated just making themselves available to do a commentary or be interviewed on camera. So it isn't for lack of trying. Just thought it was an opportunity to mention that.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, as someone who's produced special features for 20 years, it's sometimes amazingly frustrating to try and get somebody for an interview. I mean, especially for that movie, people are like, well, if you want to sit down with James Garner and Julie Andrews, you have to pay. Well, there isn't any money. I mean, there's just, everyone thinks that, well, there isn't. They're just not, the budgets now for special features are minuscule. Hey, man, the early aughts, I made out like a bandit. It was great.
It was a huge cottage industry that no longer exists.
No, but it was a very lucrative one. I traveled around. I literally lived in foreign countries for months at a time making special features. It was fantastic, and thank God I would not change it for the world. But
And it was profitable for the companies at the time.
Yep.
Because there was Tower Video, there was Virgin Video, there was Suncoast Video, and you could go into Best Buy and find 2,000 catalog movies, not
amazing.
just the newest releases.
Well, speaking of that, our own moderator, Justin Toner, says, "Hi, guys, and thanks to George for joining us today. What previous Criterion titles would you like to see in 4K and any new future releases? I would love for them to do the 1933 King Kong in 4K, which was their second release title along with Citizen Kane back in 84. Maybe some of Kurosawa's filmography as well, if possible." Now, I did ask you both, if you could talk about, just say what might be a few of your favorite things to see released. For me, I would love to get both Beauty and the Beast and Wings of Desire from Criterion on 4K. They're both black and white films shot by Henri Alecken, but decades apart. I would love to see those two films on 4K Blu-ray. And of course, if I could get Seven Samurai, we just got Studio Canal release Ron on 4K. Thank you, Studio Canal. What discs would you guys like to see in 4K from Criterion from their catalog?
I think for me, the Seven Samurai is like so obvious, and not to be focused on the number 7, but also the Seventh Seal.
Well, that's coming out though. BFI is releasing Seventh Seal on 4K, which shocked me. That was
but
announced.
They only have the rights in the UK. So
yes, but hey, I got Dieter Bastian. If I can't get it from the lovely Emma Bannon, who's in the UK, who sends me amazing stuff, then I go to Dieter. I'm like, bruh, American Psycho 4K. Come on, from Turbine. You got me the 4K American Werewolf in London. I mean, what I don't understand, George. Well, I'm asking another. Let's finish with the Criterion thing. Let me ask the two of you, Dieter. I know that you have a list because I made you do it. I gave you homework.
Correct. You gave me homework. I should do 10 titles from the Criterion collection that I would like to see on 4K, but I did go a little bit further. I did make 15.
Go
just
figure.
So I will start from the back. So the last 5 will be honorable mentions in other YouTube channels. They always call this honorable mentions. So perhaps this is Spinal Tap in 4K. I know they have probably not the rights of those titles sometimes anymore. So this is Spinal Tap. Then, since I don't have these movies, the Before trilogy from Richard Linklater, all 3 movies in a nice box set in 4K. So that would be my first purchase of the 3 movies. Then, even if they already put it out, the Guillermo del Toro trilogy for Kronos and Devil's Backbone, and I believe there was some middling reviews about the Pan's Labyrinth 4K. It was good, but not exceptional. So if they would put that out again in 4K, especially for Kronos and Devil's Backbone, probably have to buy it again. Next one will probably upset Rob, but Police Story 1 and 2, the package. But they have remastered these 2 titles already, and they are kind of wonky considering the quality. From my favorite director from Hong Kong, Johnny To, Throwdown, but this one's gotten a remastered version too. So this would be the 5 honorable mentions. Now to the 10 real ones. Funny Games from Michael Haneke in 4K, the original one. Then one Rob is always recommending, but I don't have it. I already have it in Amazon UK in the stuff that you can put in the basket sometimes. The Lure in 4K.
Oh, I love that movie so much. And that Criterion disc is great.
Yeah. So that in 4K would be great for me. This would be the first purchase. Blue is the warmest color I have on my list. Then, considering the reputation, Salo or the 120 Days of Sodom.
Because we need that in 4K.
You need that in 4K, correct, Rob? Traffic from Steven Soderbergh in 4K. Then, because I think there's not one title from Kevin Smith out, Chasing Amy in 4K. Then, you showed it last week, Rob, from Hong Kong Rescue. But I would make a double bill, Hard Boiled and The Killer. from Criterion.
By the way, I just want to
Okay.
say that I don't advocate piracy in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, correct. But they were DVD titles, so they haven't even released these as a Blu-ray, I believe. Halt. And even if Arrow did a nice box set last year, of course, RoboCop unrated in 4K. And the last two, which were kind of off titles for Criterion, of course.
Don't you say Armageddon.
And The Rock
What? Armageddon and The Rock. Wow.
in
okay.
4K.
So I love your meat and potatoes
These were
list there, dear.
Criterion. These were Criterion titles.
I
Those
thought
were
very
Criterion.
populist. I like this list. Now, George, I would ask you the same thing. I mean, Criterion, like they put out the Wong Kar-wai box set, and there was a lot of controversy over the transfers. I get that, but what a beautiful box set. The Fellini box set that Criterion put out, amazing. The Bergman box set, like, my God. So I ask you, George, we talked about Seven Samurai, but what are some of the movies that you would love to see Criterion, and hopefully, maybe you could help out or something. But
You asked me to pick three, so I when we talked yesterday, so I told you the first two, but the third one for me, and I don't think this would be I think this would actually be very successful for them, is Fellini's Amarcord.
great film.
It's great, and it's so beautiful to look at. It would be astounding, because you have to take into consideration one of my favorite Criterion releases is Female Trouble.
John Waters.
John Waters. But when you're dealing with a film that was shot on 16 millimeter, and the 4K is not really necessary.
Yes, it is. Don't say that. Shame on you, sir.
Well,
4K is necessary for everything. Come on now.
That's the point. Is some films, the Blu-ray would bring out all that's in the negative.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important to deal with. And I'd love to be proven wrong, because then I will have learned something new, and I always like to learn something new. So.
Yeah, well, okay, this is interesting. Our friend Stubble McShave from Sweden asks, question for George, how do you think the new owners of Warner Brothers will affect their physical media releases of the titles? Will there be any change in priorities? And you brought up Shawshank Redemption, which I was very excited about. And now with HBO Max, I would think that why not remaster the entire Warner catalog? Is that something you see could happen?
Well, AT&T completed their purchase of Time Warner on June 15th, 2018, a day which will live in infamy, because I was picking up my puppy dogs at the airport. So that's why it stands prominent in my mind. But it's also public knowledge that AT&T is selling Warner Media to Discovery Communications, and the new company will be called Warner Brothers, or more aptly, I should say, Warner Bros, because you always got to make sure it's referred to. It's Warner Brothers, but Warner Bros Discovery is going to be the name of the new company.
Dude, that's so awesome, dude. Warner Bros Discovery, totally.
From what I hear, a lot of titles are being discussed for 4K, which made me really happy. And I just want to mention one other Criterion, because this is very important. Jacques Tati's Playtime. And the reason I bring that up is it was shot with 65 millimeter negative. And there is nothing better than a wide format film, a film shot with a 65 millimeter negative, or in Technorama or VistaVision, where so much of the frame is used and there isn't any distortion coming from old lenses and so forth and so on. So when you can have that, it's something special. And Playtime is a really, really terrific Tati movies. I love all of his films.
Well,
but that would look really great.
Now, obviously, Criterion's released that a number of times. It was on Laserdisc, it was on DVD, and it was on Blu-ray. It's on Blu-ray. Now, how does one pay for something like that? Like if you were going to then go back to that negative, like say, I don't know whether I don't know who has the rights. Like if Studio Canal, and to be honest, I really love what Studio Canal has been doing, going back and doing things like The Deer Hunter in 4K, or Basic Instinct, or Angel Heart, or John Carpenter's the 4 films they released. How do you get let's say, for instance, I don't know, let's say Warner Brothers had the rights to Playtime. Restoring a movie with that kind of negative is not cheap. So
No.
how would you then go, let's say, I don't know, let's say you ended up working for Warner Bros. Discovery, and you had to make the case to restore something like Playtime that's obviously a 65 millimeter negative. It's not cheap to do, but you do have MPI on the lot, they'll help you out. How do you make that case to the powers that be, like, hey?
Well, that's a great question, because there's what I'd like to see and what I would support doing as an executive. And they don't always line up. It's profit before passion.
Of course.
And that has been my... It's been my Achilles heel, because I've had to say no so many times to things that I desperately would want to see happen, but they would not be profitable for the company. And I have to put the company's profits first and foremost. And when you can find that mixture of succeeding in meeting the artistic need and come up with a profit, that was the beauty of what Warner Archive did, is we were able to bring things out with phenomenal quality at a reasonable price, and also in the process have them pull the negative. And for example, when we were doing Arthur Penn's Night Moves, we were going to work off an interpositive and make a new HD master. The interpositive was terrible. It had all sorts of lab errors and all sorts. That got the preservation department to come in and say, okay, we'll scan the camera negative at 4K. If you need to go back to the camera negative, the company rule is you have to scan the camera negative at 4K. To make a 4K disc, you are seeing twice to 4 times the amount of image. You're also seeing twice to 4 times the amount of dirt and scratches and detritus. And that is the highest cost. There is no automated system that is worth its weight in anything that has come along to solve that problem. It is a huge problem, and it has to be done by hand. And it takes a long time, and it is profusely expensive. And that is, I think, the biggest problem in being able to make this into a business where you can be very flexible about the kind of films that get released in 4K. Yeah. Because the costs are just the authoring costs, the compression costs, the cost of the raw disc. They're so much higher than a regular Blu-ray.
Yeah.
So that all has to be considered. And I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but that the ultimate responsibility is to the shareholder of the company. And I always felt that I had to be accountable to the head of finance. If they called me on anything, I needed to be able to prove that we had been profitable. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it.
Right. And I mean, I think it's a great point. And however, that said, and I know it's probably silly to expect this of a publicly held company, but a film company's legacy is only as valuable really as their catalog. I mean, that's what they are. You talk about Warner Brothers or Disney, they've made their bones with the material they've made, that they've released. And pop culture, I've always said on this channel, has a half-life of about 20 years. You go back 40 years or 60 years or even 80 years now, a lot of people, they don't know these things because they didn't grow up with them, they weren't part of their lives, but it's still part of the legacy of the company. And cinema's only been around for a little more than 100 years. It's not like you can't go to the Louvre and see a movie that's 500 years old because they don't exist. And we have a unique opportunity to preserve the entire, I mean, how many silent films no longer exist? And yet, do you think that studios, is there any kind of a mandate? I mean, maybe even at the national level, where film preservation is something that should be built into the budgets of publicly held companies like Warner Brothers or like Disney?
Well, I can only speak. I've never worked at Disney. I can't speak for them. I don't know how their system works. So I don't know. I do know that they started paying attention to that during Walt's lifetime before his, early, in my view, demise, death. And I think he was 66.
66, yeah.
But Disney and MGM were the only companies in the 60s to start taking their nitrate and converting it to safety. And Roger Mayer told me at MGM, he went out for a tour of Lot 3. They had a back lot behind the studio and another one a few miles away. And on Lot 3, there were these little square buildings with a fan on top of them. And he said it was like 90 degrees out, and he's walking with the studio manager. He was assistant studio manager. He says, "What are those little buildings?" He goes, "Oh, those are film vaults. That's where we keep our nitrate." And he said, "You're keeping them in those little buildings in this heat?" And he said they started discussing what should be protected and what shouldn't be, and they decided everything. And that's why the largest percentage of any studio's silent output falls under MGM. More MGM silents exist than any other studio's silent output. There's still a lot that are gone. There were 2 bad lot fires in which people were killed. And that's when the city of Culver City told MGM, "You've got 10 years to get all the nitrate off the lot." And the nitrate was sent to George Eastman House. At Warner Brothers, all of the Warner Brothers nitrate is either at UCLA or the Library of Congress. We're not allowed to have more than 90 minutes worth of nitrate film on the lot at any given time. So if they're working on a 120-minute feature, they have to store the other 30 minutes in another vault someplace else until they're ready.
Wow.
So it makes it, and a lot of nitrate has been worked on very recently and continues to be worked on as of this very moment. So it's a very delicate, arduous process. The beauty of it is the scanners that are scanning film today do not actually touch the film or the sprockets. So you can have a warped negative. We've had these films that we couldn't use the elements because they had been water damaged or something. And the scanner is able to make up for that. And just the progress I have seen from a technical standpoint in the last 5-6 years, not to mention the last 10 years, is remarkable. And it will continue to develop. And we have that to look forward to. We also have the National Film Preservation Foundation and the National Film Registry. Every year, 25 films are named to the registry of artistic or ethical, importance. And sometimes they could be somebody's home movies. And sometimes they can be, the most, big financial blockbuster, like a Jaws or something like that. The reason why they get put into the registry is that it's supposed to cover everything. And that was the Library of Congress's reaction to the horror of colorization in the late 80s. And the film registry is a first step. The fact that all the studios, to one degree or another, have asset protection. It's hard. I don't like the way that sounds, because it sounds like you're talking about, nuts and bolts and not films and works of art.
Right.
But the asset protection programs at every studio are now in place. And if these things had been in place 50 years ago, a lot more movies would be existing today that don't exist anymore.
Well, 200 Watt Studio says you just made a sale of the Bad Day at Black Rock Blu-ray disc from Warner Archive, and he also goes on to say, "What about a Serbian film in 4K?" Just kidding. Yeah, come on, man. Although I did buy the Blu-ray. Listen, George, we have kept you now for over 2 hours, and I think if we kept going, we'd keep you for another 2 hours.
Well, I'm not going anywhere.
Well, to wrap up our conversation, I want to bring you back, like maybe even do I talked about this with you, doing a Sunday in the Park with George, if you know that. But I think a Sunday on the bit rates with George, if we could like come back and revisit with you. Obviously, your breadth of knowledge is astonishing. And I think, as I've said, there's no one, you're the only person on planet Earth that knows what you know. And I think you are worth your weight in gold, and the what you mean to the continued existence of Hollywood's rich cinematic legacy cannot be undersold, and it's so phenomenal that you are still here and doing all of this incredible work that you've done. And for my work in home video, you've always been a constant presence. I mean, your name, whenever you were involved in anything, I mean, that's when you get, you talk about, well, I know Robert Harris. Like, of course you do. And it's just amazing that your work continues and hopefully will continue to flourish in the future. I would ask you, how do you feel about the future of home entertainment? Obviously, we're all physical media collectors here. And, like you talked about the PlayStation 5 extending the time, we've heard maybe even 10 years. Do you think, are you optimistic about the future of physical media, or should we all just chuck it and start digitizing everything and putting it on our servers?
I'm guardedly optimistic in a long-term view. At least for the next 10 years, it's going to continue to exist. To what form and how content is distributed, that is ever changing. And the more people can develop and manage the distribution of physical media in a way where it is profitable for the content owners. And I think you're seeing a lot of change of ownership. And the question you asked before about the ownership of our, speaking in terms of Warner Brothers being bought by Discovery, I see with very little, this is just my theory, from what I've read, because I'm not with the company since February, the head of Discovery Communications wants to put the emphasis on Warner Brothers. And that's why the company is going to be Warner Brothers Discovery. And that takes nothing away from the obvious importance of having a fantastic streaming service, which HBO Max is. And
I love HBO Max.
All can live together in an ecosystem that allows for everything. That's why this is forgotten by most people. But in 2013, we launched the first studio-based streaming service, Warner Archive Instant. We had no extra staff. It was the same staff that was working on our little One Archive business. I was going in and, changing spelling mistakes in the metadata on weekends, and we were dealing with customer service, questions from our homes, and everybody was so passionate about it. We were kept from having access to the best content in the library because it might threaten other divisions. And the executive who was in charge of ultimately deciding if that would live or die, he got bored with it and said, we're going to have these people in New York do it. And they took it away from us just as we were building momentum. And then those people got, they were let go. And then we all know about Filmstruck between Turner Classic Movies and Criterion, and AT&T decided to shut that down. I don't know what the backstory to that is, so it's not appropriate for me to opine. It might have been a huge loss of money. It also may have been a threat to what they were going to do with HBO Max. I don't know, but that broke the hearts of a lot of people. But there is the Criterion channel, which I think is the best place for people who want to stream and get to learn about a movie without, plunking down the big bucks to buy it and own it. And it's not big bucks. It's really minimal bucks if you look at the scheme of things. It's less than the price of 2 movie tickets. So my point is there's room for the foreseeable future for everything. And I hope that all studios will continue to tend to their libraries and realize they're not just names on a page.
I don't think you could have said it better. And I think that's amazing. So, Dieter, let me ask you, before we wrap this up, do you have any questions for George that you might want to have asked?
Not really a question, but I have you both, Rob on the left, George on the right, and it looks to me on the Rob side I have the software, and on the right side with George I have the hardware in the background.
I love that. The software and the hardware. Yeah, I'm looking at George's background the whole time. I'm like, my God, the history of home entertainment technology. Well, listen, this has been it's such a delight for me, and I know our viewers. George, I've wanted to have you on the show for a long time. We've talked about it for a while, and I want to thank you for giving us your time. I mean, this is probably one of our longest shows we've ever done, and I could go for another 2 hours, and I hope that I can have you come back.
Absolutely.
Maybe you'll have some news to share with us in the future, and I'd love to pick your brain about that. Because, there's always new 4K titles that we all need, right? I mean, everybody who watches this show knows that. And
there's room for growth and expansion.
God damn right. I feel that. Elizabeth, my girlfriend, she's always like, really? You're going to buy another 4K copy of To Live and Die in L.A.? Like, don't you already have 6? I'm like, yeah, baby, but I need another one. She's like, but why? Why do you need another one? And I'm like, well, because it hasn't come out in 4K yet, and Kino Lorber just announced it. So why wouldn't I want it? It happens, and we need that. I mean, I think you're not a real connoisseur unless you bought it on VHS, Laserdisc, CED, DVD, HD, DVD, Blu-ray, and now 4K. I mean, come on now. And there are some movies that I have in all of those formats, or TV shows like the original Star Trek. Don't tell anyone, but hey, it happens. So hopefully it can still happen, because I'm still going to buy discs. Aren't you, Dieter?
Of course, my threshold of
You're the trash panda. You're the Kaiser of trash.
And as long as I can buy those titles, like George says, we will be fine for a few years to come.
Yeah, I've got my pre-orders in, on probably dozens of titles coming from all over the world.
I mean, there was the Mommy Dearest crisis we both had to live through.
Yes.
People, the viewers on this channel know that for whatever reason, I think it was because, they had to get Indiana Jones out in 4K, so the replication facility is like, sorry guys, your Mommy Dearest discs will have to wait. And I've never seen a disc disappear. Like, here's the day it was going to come out. Amazon usually delivers it to my doorstep, and it just, for weeks, Mommy Dearest just went away. And I'm like, what? You know what? I mean, no more wire hangers didn't mean no more Mommy Dearest Blu-rays, but finally it did show up and the crisis was averted. So
I heard
you.
that Faye Dunaway was down in Guadalajara threatening the people at Technicolor Mexico, saying, I will whip you with this hanger if you make that disc. Don't do it. I'm kidding.
By God, no! I think that's just as plausible an explanation as any. But thank God, I mean, you know what? Even those DVDs, while I would Blu-rays, I'd love to have them in 4K. But Paramount's done a good job. Their Fatal Attraction remaster looks great. The fact that they put out Almost Famous as part of the same program in 4K. Well, listen, your dad's been calling you. Like, I know. You did tell me you and your dad talk on Sundays. He's probably like,
yes.
George, where are you? I mean, COVID's up in LA. Are you not answering the phone because you're sick? We don't want your dad to think the worst. So I want to thank you, George Feltenstein, for being here. Do you have a presence on social media? Can people find you?
No, I happily am not on social media. Never have been. Hope never to be.
But you haunt the forums. You're on the forums. You look.
I'm a lurker. I watch, I read everything. I have been, and I mean, I started doing chats for Warner Home Video on the Home Theater Forum in 1997. So I'm a big believer in that part of it. I don't participate in it personally, but I am fascinated to read the cogent, important things people have to say, and flabbergasted by the ridiculous things other people have to say. And I realize, how long has it been since you've been in your mother's basement? You know? I just want to thank you for the opportunity, because I've been loving watching your show on YouTube for so long, and we reconnected, and this has been such a pleasure, and I will be ready to return whenever you'll have me.
Oh my God, we will have you. And to me, it's been such a thrill, such an honor. I mean, you've elevated this channel. I mean, not that Dieter and I aren't wildly entertaining, but having you on this show elevates it to a whole nother level. And I can't thank you enough for being here. And I really look forward to the next 10 years of physical media. Hopefully you'll be at the forefront, leading the vanguard, so we'll have something to talk about every week. Because
that would be, I would love if that would happen. You know, I'm going to cross my fingers and toes and hope that happens.
Well, me too. And on that note, I want to thank all of our moderators. We got Justin Toner here. I don't know who else. Brian Hepburn is here. Dean Mikatich from the UK is here. Thank you. I want to thank you boys for our blue wrenches. Our moderators are so important, because God knows if we didn't have you, the live chat would spin wildly off into oblivion. I want to thank my cohort, my partner in crime, Mr. Dieter Bastian, for being here, all the way from Saarbrücken, Deutschland. And, of course, if you want to write us letters, you can. We'll get to those next week. You can go to the Burnettwork.net website, free of charge. Send us a letter. Just put in the subject heading, physical media, or I want Dieter to read this in his German accent. I'll make sure he does. And so thank you all very much for joining us for this very special episode of Let's Get Physical Media. I won't sing it. And yeah, okay, make your Xanadu jokes. You can do that. It's fine. We all love Xanadu. And on that note, I will say to everyone, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. Now, Dieter, finish that in German.
Jede Person, die du triffst, hat eine Geschichte zu erzählen, die du noch zu hören hast. Alles, was du tun musst, ist zuhören.
I love it. And on that note, I will wish all of you, well, have a better day. And George, thank you again for
My
gracing
pleasure.
us with
Thanks,
your
George.
presence.
Thank you